The cold wind stung Hattie Zachary's face as she ran through the tall prairie grass, her breath coming in ragged gasps beneath the vast, star-studded sky of 1873 Wyoming Territory. Her heart hammered against her ribs, and each step sent pain shooting through her bare feet, but she refused to slow down. Behind her lay Fort Laramie, and the man who had purchased her from her uncle, a cruel cattle baron who had promised her to an even crueler business associate 3 times her age. Ahead lay uncertainty, freedom, and quite possibly death. 22-year-old Hattie had stolen a water canteen and a small bundle of provisions, but in her haste to escape, she'd left her boots behind. The prairie stretched endlessly before her, bathed in silver moonlight that made the tall grasses shimmer like a ghostly sea. She had no destination in mind, only away. Away from the wedding that awaited her at dawn, away from a life of servitude to a man whose eyes held no warmth. A sudden rustling in the distance made her freeze. She dropped to her knees, making herself as small as possible in the high grass. The sound of hoofbeats grew louder, and Hattie pressed herself flat against the earth, her heart racing. She hadn't expected pursuit so soon. Dawn was hours away. Her absence shouldn't have been discovered yet. The rider approached slowly, methodically. Hattie held her breath, praying the darkness would hide her. The horse stopped not 20 yards from where she lay. She heard the creak of leather as the rider dismounted. "I know you're out there, miss," called a deep voice. Not her uncle's voice. Not the voice of her intended husband. This voice was younger, steadier. "The prairie's no place for a woman alone at night. There are wolves, coyotes, and worse." Hattie remained still, weighing her options. Run and be seen, or stay and be found. "I don't mean you harm," the voice continued. "But you left a trail even a blind man could follow. If I found you, others will too." Slowly, Hattie raised her head above the grass. The figure standing by the horse was tall and lean, silhouetted against the night sky. A cowboy, by the look of his stance and the broad-brimmed hat. "How do I know you're not taking me back?" she called, her voice trembling despite her efforts to sound brave. The man took a step forward, then stopped, as if sensing her fear. "I don't know where back is, miss. I was riding fence for the Double S when I saw someone running across Harker's field like the devil himself was giving chase." Hattie stood cautiously, ready to bolt if necessary. The man remained where he was, making no move toward her. "I'm Quentin Stokes," he said, removing his hat in a gesture of respect. "Ranch foreman for the Double S. And you look like a woman in need of help." In the moonlight, Hattie could now see his face, young, perhaps 26 or 27, with features that spoke of days spent in the sun and wind. His eyes were kind, but cautious. "They'll be looking for me by morning," she said, the words tumbling out before she could stop them. Quentin nodded slowly. "I figured as much. No one runs like that unless they're running from something." He glanced at her feet, noticing for the first time that they were bare and bloodied. "Your feet won't carry you much further tonight." Hattie felt tears of frustration welling in her eyes. She had come so far, only to be stopped by her own body's limitations. Quentin looked back in the direction she had come from, then to the vast prairie ahead. When he turned back to her, his decision was made. "I'll protect you now," he said simply, as if promising to shield her from a rainstorm rather than whatever demons pursued her. "At least until we figure out something better." "Why would you help me?" Hattie asked, suspicion mixing with desperate hope. "You don't know me." "No, I don't," Quentin agreed. "But I know trouble when I see it, and I know that sometimes good people find themselves in bad situations." He gestured to his horse. "My cabin's about 3 miles from here. It's not much, but it's warm, and no one will look for you there tonight." Hattie hesitated, weighing the dangers of trusting this stranger against the certainty of what awaited her if she was caught. Quentin seemed to understand her dilemma. "I give you my word as a man who values his honor that no harm will come to you under my protection," he said solemnly. "But we need to move quickly. The night won't hide you forever." Something in his steady gaze convinced her. Hattie nodded and took a tentative step forward. Quentin moved with surprising gentleness for such a tall man. He removed his coat and wrapped it around her shoulders before helping her onto his horse. The warmth of the coat enveloped her, carrying with it the scent of leather, horses, and pine. He swung up behind her, keeping a respectful distance as he reached around to take the reins. "Hold on," he said quietly, and they set off across the prairie. As they rode, Hattie felt the tension in her body slowly begin to unwind. She was still running, still in danger, but for the first time since her parents had died 3 years ago, leaving her at the mercy of her uncle, she felt something close to safe. Quentin's cabin sat nestled against a stand of pines, with a small corral for his horse and a creek bubbling nearby. It was indeed small, just one room with a stone fireplace, a narrow bed, a table with 2 chairs, and a few shelves holding books, provisions, and tools. But to Hattie, who had spent the last month in a crowded bunkhouse at her uncle's ranch, it looked like paradise. Quentin lit a lamp and built up the fire while Hattie stood awkwardly by the door, unsure of her place in this man's home. "Sit," he said, gesturing to a chair. "Let me look at those feet." Too exhausted to argue, Hattie sank into the chair. Quentin filled a basin with water from a bucket by the door and knelt before her. With a gentleness that surprised her, he cleaned the dirt and blood from her feet, his face grave as he assessed the damage. "Not too bad," he said finally. "The skin's broken in a few places, but nothing that won't heal." He reached for a jar of salve on a shelf and applied it carefully to her cuts. "You're lucky. The prairie can be merciless on bare feet." "Thank you," Hattie said, suddenly aware of how vulnerable she was alone with a man she had just met, miles from anywhere. Quentin seemed to read her thoughts. He stood and moved to the other side of the table, giving her space. "Are you hungry?" At the mention of food, Hattie realized she was famished. She nodded, and Quentin set about preparing a simple meal of beans, bacon, and cornbread that he reheated from earlier that day. They ate in silence, Hattie too focused on satisfying her hunger to speak, Quentin seemingly content to let her be. When they had finished, he cleared the plates and poured them each a cup of coffee. "Now," he said, sitting across from her, "I reckon you might want to tell me what has you running across the prairie in the middle of the night with no shoes." Hattie cradled the warm cup in her hands, finding comfort in its heat. "My name is Hattie Zachary," she began. "My parents died of fever 3 years ago. My uncle, Edgar Zachary, took me in." She paused, gathering her courage. "He runs the Z-Bar Ranch near Fort Laramie." Quentin's eyebrows rose slightly. "Edgar Zachary? I know of him. Not many speak well of the man." "For good reason," Hattie said bitterly. "He worked me like a servant, which I could bear. But last month, he made a business arrangement with Bartholomew Crane." "The railroad investor?" Hattie nodded. "The same. My uncle owes him money, a lot of money. To settle the debt, he offered me as payment. The wedding was supposed to be tomorrow morning." Quentin's face darkened. "You're not cattle to be traded. To my uncle, I'm less than cattle. At least he cares for his livestock." Hattie's voice broke, and she took a moment to compose herself. "Crane is 63 years old and has buried 3 wives already. I refused the match, but my uncle—" She unconsciously touched her cheek where a fading bruise still showed. Quentin's jaw tightened, but he said nothing, allowing her to continue. "Tonight was my last chance to escape. I took what I could carry and ran." She looked up at him, her eyes filling with tears. "They'll be looking for me. Crane has men, and my uncle won't let me embarrass him like this. If they find me, they won't," Quentin said firmly. "Not tonight, at least. And tomorrow, we'll figure out what's next." "We?" Hattie asked, surprised by his inclusion of himself in her problems. "I gave you my word," he said simply. "I'll protect you now. That doesn't end with bringing you to my cabin." For the first time in years, Hattie felt a glimmer of hope. This man, this stranger, was offering her something she had forgotten existed, genuine kindness with no expectation of return. You should sleep, Quentin continued, rising from the table. Take the bed. I'll sleep by the fire. I can't take your bed, Hattie protested. You can and you will, he replied, his tone gentle but firm. You've had a harder day than most, and tomorrow might not be any easier. Too exhausted to argue further, Hattie allowed herself to be guided to the narrow bed. Quentin provided her with one of his clean shirts to sleep in and then stepped outside to give her privacy to change. The shirt was enormous on her, reaching almost to her knees, but it was clean and soft from many washings. When Quentin returned, he had made himself a pallet of blankets near the fireplace. He added another log to the fire, then settled down with his back to her, giving her as much privacy as the small cabin would allow. Thank you, Hattie said softly into the darkness. For everything. Get some rest, Miss Zachary, came his quiet reply. You're safe tonight. As Hattie drifted toward sleep, wrapped in a stranger's shirt in a stranger's bed, she realized she believed him. For tonight, at least, she was safe. Dawn broke with a gentle persistence that filtered through the cabin's single window, painting the rough-hewn walls with soft, golden light. Hattie woke disoriented, momentarily forgetting where she was. The events of the previous night came rushing back as she saw Quentin Stokes standing by the fireplace, quietly preparing coffee. He glanced over, noticing she was awake. Morning, he said, his voice low. Sleep well? Hattie sat up, pulling the blanket around her shoulders. Better than I expected, she admitted. Despite the circumstances, exhaustion had claimed her quickly and held her in a dreamless sleep. Quentin poured a cup of coffee and brought it to her. It's strong, he warned. Only way I know how to make it. The coffee was indeed strong, but the warmth and bitterness were welcome. Hattie sipped it gratefully while Quentin moved about the cabin with the easy efficiency of a man accustomed to solitude and self-reliance. I've been thinking, he said, setting a pan of bacon to fry. Your uncle and Crane will have men searching in all directions, but they'll expect you to head east toward Cheyenne or north toward the Deadwood Trail. That was my plan, Hattie admitted. To reach Cheyenne and find work, maybe as a seamstress or a teacher's assistant. Quentin nodded. It's what they'll expect. Which is why I think you should stay here, at least for a few days. Hattie nearly choked on her coffee. Here? But I know it's not proper, Quentin interrupted, a faint flush coloring his tanned face. But I'm rarely here during the day. My duties at the ranch keep me away from sunup to sundown. You'd have privacy, and time to heal those feet before continuing your journey. Your employer wouldn't question you bringing a woman to your cabin? Hattie asked skeptically. Samuel Stanton owns the Double S, but he's in St. Louis visiting his daughter. Won't be back for at least 2 weeks. The ranch hands keep to themselves, and none come this way unless sent. Hattie considered his offer. It made tactical sense to hide where they wouldn't look, and her feet did need time to heal. But the impropriety of staying in a bachelor's cabin, even one as honorable as Quentin seemed to be, gave her pause. I don't want to cause you trouble, she said finally. Quentin turned from the stove, his expression serious. Miss Zachary, trouble found you through no fault of your own. I'm offering to help, not out of pity or expectation, but because it's the right thing to do. The simplicity of his statement struck her. In her uncle's world, every action had a price, every favor required repayment. Quentin's straightforward decency was almost foreign to her. 2 days, she decided. To let my feet heal. Then I'll move on. Quentin nodded, seemingly satisfied with this compromise. 2 days, he agreed. Though I doubt your uncle will give up so quickly. After breakfast, Quentin brought in a large tub and filled it with water he'd heated over the fire. For your feet, he explained. The warmth will help them heal faster. He then provided her with a pair of his socks comically large on her smaller feet, but soft and clean, and a spare pair of boots that, while also too big, would protect her feet once they had healed enough for her to travel. Before leaving for his day's work, Quentin showed her where he kept his rifle. Just in case, he said grimly and pointed out the root cellar beneath a trapdoor in the floor, where she could hide if anyone approached. "I'll be back before sundown," he promised. "Bar the door behind me, and don't open it for anyone else." After he left, Hattie explored the small cabin more thoroughly. Quentin Stokes lived simply but neatly. His few books were well-worn volumes of poetry by Whitman and Tennyson, a copy of the Bible, and practical guides to ranching and horse breeding. On a shelf near his bed sat a daguerreotype of a handsome couple, his parents, she guessed, and a small wooden box that, when opened, revealed a silver pocket watch and a woman's wedding ring. Hattie quickly closed the box, feeling like an intruder in this man's private grief. She occupied herself instead with cleaning the cabin, partly out of gratitude and partly to keep her mind from dwelling on the danger that still pursued her. She swept the floor, washed the breakfast dishes, and even managed to mend a tear in one of Quentin's shirts she found in a basket waiting for attention. By midday, restlessness drove her to peek outside. The cabin was set in a small clearing, with the pine forest at its back and the vast prairie stretching before it. In the distance, she could see cattle grazing the double-S herd, presumably. The day was clear and warm, the sky an endless blue. Hattie ventured a few steps outside, savoring the feel of sunshine on her face. Her feet, though still tender, felt better after the warm soak. She was about to return inside when a movement in the distance caught her eye. Riders, 3 of them, moving along the horizon. Fear clutched at her heart as she darted back into the cabin, barring the door behind her. Were they looking for her? Had they somehow tracked her here? She watched through a crack in the shutters as the riders continued parallel to the cabin but didn't approach. After what seemed an eternity, they disappeared from view, continuing toward the west. Just ranch hands, she told herself, trying to calm her racing heart. Just doing their jobs. But the incident reminded her sharply of her precarious situation. She retreated to the root cellar for over an hour, emerging only when convinced no one was coming. The remainder of the day passed in anxious waiting. As the sun began its descent, Hattie found herself watching the horizon for Quentin's return with an eagerness that surprised her. She had known the man less than a day, yet she already trusted him in a way she had trusted no one since her parents' deaths. When at last she spotted him riding toward the cabin, relief washed over her. She unbarred the door as he approached, noting the weariness in his posture as he dismounted. "Any trouble?" he asked immediately upon entering. "I saw riders in the distance, but they didn't come this way," Hattie replied. "Were they your men?" Quentin's expression grew serious. "Likely not. I heard talk in town today. Your uncle has offered a reward for information about your whereabouts, $50. Hattie's stomach dropped. $50 was more than many men in the territory earned in months. "That will bring out searchers." "It already has," Quentin confirmed. "I also heard that Crane arrived at Fort Laramie last night, earlier than expected." "He's taken personal offense at your departure." "Of course he has," Hattie said bitterly. "His pride is wounded." Quentin removed his hat and ran a hand through his hair, a gesture Hattie was beginning to recognize as a sign of his concern. "There's more. They're saying you stole jewelry from your uncle, a family heirloom meant for your dowry." "What?" Hattie exclaimed, outraged. "I took nothing but a water canteen and some food. My mother's locket is the only jewelry I own, and I've had it since she died." "I believe you," Quentin said quickly. "But it changes things. Now they're not just looking for a runaway bride, they're hunting a thief. That gives them legal standing to involve the law." Hattie sank into a chair, the implications hitting her hard. "They'll have posses. Wanted posters." "Not yet," Quentin assured her. "But soon, if you're not found. Which means our 2-day plan might need reconsideration." That evening, over a dinner of venison stew that Quentin had brought from the ranch kitchen, they discussed options. Cheyenne was now too dangerous, it would be the first place they'd look. The gold fields of the Black Hills might offer anonymity, but the journey was treacherous, especially for a woman alone. "What about California?" Hattie suggested. "Or Oregon?" I've heard there are opportunities for women there. The journey's long and hard, Quentin cautioned. And expensive. Do you have money? Hattie shook her head. Her uncle had kept her penniless, ensuring her dependence. I have some savings, Quentin offered. Not much, but enough to get you to Sacramento, maybe. I couldn't take your money, Hattie protested. Consider it a loan, he replied. You can repay me when you're established. His generosity touched her deeply, but a new worry had taken root. If they're saying I'm a thief, they'll be watching the stage lines, the trains. I'll be recognized. Quentin was silent for a long moment, considering. There's another possibility, he said finally. My brother Quinn has a small ranch near Pueblo, Colorado. It's not much, but it's far enough from here that your uncle's influence wouldn't reach. Quinn's wife died 2 years ago, and he's been raising their daughter alone. He could use help, and you'd have a safe place to stay until this blows over. Your brother would take in a stranger? Hattie asked incredulously. If I ask him to, Quentin said with quiet confidence. Quinn and I don't always see eye to eye, but we stand by each other. And he's a good man, he'd understand your situation. The idea of having a destination, a purpose, was tempting. But Hattie hesitated, acutely aware that she was already deeply in Quentin's debt. I don't want to be a burden to your family. You wouldn't be, Quentin assured her. Quinn's daughter Lily is 7. She needs a woman's influence, and Quinn needs help with the house and the bookkeeping. You'd be earning your keep. Hattie considered the offer. It wasn't the independence she had dreamed of, but it was safety, and perhaps a stepping stone to something more. How would I get there? If they're watching the roads. There's a cattle drive leaving for Colorado in 3 days, Quentin said. The trail boss, Hank Jeffers, is an old friend. If I explain the situation, he might let you join as a cook's assistant. It wouldn't be comfortable, but it would get you to Pueblo. The plan had merit, Hattie had to admit. But one aspect troubled her. And what happens to you when they discover you helped me? Quentin's face softened slightly. I can handle myself, Miss Zachary. And I doubt they'll connect us. By the time they think to question the hands at neighboring ranches, you'll be long gone. There was logic in his words, but Hattie couldn't shake the feeling that she was bringing danger to a man who had shown her nothing but kindness. Still, what choice did she have? Her options were limited, and time was running out. Thank you, she said finally. If your friend agrees, I'll go to Pueblo. Quentin nodded, satisfaction evident in his expression. I'll ride to town tomorrow to send a telegram to Quinn and speak with Hank. For now, try to rest. Your feet need to heal if you're going to be on a cattle drive. That night, as they settled into their now established sleeping arrangements, Hattie in the bed, Quentin on his pallet by the fire, a comfortable silence fell between them. In just 24 hours, they had developed a strange sort of intimacy, born of shared danger and mutual respect. Mr. Stokes, Hattie said into the darkness, why are you doing all this for me? There was a long pause before Quentin answered. I had a sister once, he said quietly. Emily. She was 17 when a man like your uncle decided her fate for her. She ran too, but no one helped her. We found her 3 days later by Cutter's Creek. The implication was clear, and Hattie's heart ached for the pain in his voice. I'm sorry, she whispered. It was 8 years ago, Quentin replied, his voice steady but somber. Not a day goes by that I don't wish I'd known what she was planning, that I could have helped her. When I saw you running across that field last night, it was like seeing a ghost. I couldn't turn away. His honesty moved her. This wasn't just kindness. It was a kind of redemption he was seeking. Thank you for telling me, she said softly. Get some sleep, Miss Zachary, he responded. Tomorrow will be another long day. As Hattie drifted toward sleep, she found herself studying the silhouette of the man who had become her unexpected protector. There was a quiet strength to Quentin Stokes, a steadiness that made her feel safer than she had in years. In another life, Under different circumstances, she might have allowed herself to notice the kindness in his eyes or the gentle way his mouth curved when he almost smiled. But such thoughts were dangerous luxuries she couldn't afford. In 3 days she would be gone from his life, carrying her troubles elsewhere. It was better this way, she told herself firmly. Better for both of them. The second day dawned with a sky heavy with the promise of rain. Quentin left earlier than usual, eager to reach town and make arrangements before the weather turned. Hattie spent the morning pacing the small cabin, her mind racing with possibilities and fears. What if Quentin's friend refused to take her? What if her uncle's men were watching the cattle drives as well? What if Quentin himself was discovered helping her? By midday, the clouds had opened, releasing a steady downpour that drummed on the cabin roof. Hattie stood at the window, watching the rain transform the dusty yard into mud, and wondered if Quentin had found shelter. The thought surprised her, this concern for a man she barely knew. Yet, in the past 2 days he had become the center of her world, her lifeline in a storm that threatened to overwhelm her. A sound outside drew her attention: hoofbeats, approaching rapidly. Her heart raced as she peered through the rain-streaked window. Relief flooded her when she recognized Quentin's tall figure, hunched against the downpour. She opened the door as he dismounted, rain streaming from his hat and coat. "You're soaked," she said, ushering him inside. "Got caught in the worst of it on the way back," he confirmed, removing his dripping hat. His usually neat hair was plastered to his forehead, and his clothes clung to him, revealing the lean strength of his frame. Hattie busied herself building up the fire while Quentin removed his wet coat and boots. "Did you speak with your friend?" she asked, trying to keep the anxiety from her voice. "I did," Quentin replied, moving closer to the fire. "Hank's willing to take you on as a cook's helper. The drive leaves from the north pasture of the Double S the day after tomorrow." Relief washed over Hattie. "And your brother? Did you reach him?" "Sent a telegram. Haven't received a reply yet, but I don't doubt he'll agree." Quentin rubbed his hands together near the flames, his expression thoughtful. "There's something else. I heard more talk in town. Your uncle has indeed involved the sheriff, claiming you stole a diamond brooch that belonged to your aunt." "I've never even seen such a brooch," Hattie protested. "I know," Quentin said. "But it gives them the authority they need. There's a small posse forming, led by one of Crane's men. They're focusing on the eastern routes for now, but they'll widen their search soon." Hattie sank into a chair, the weight of her situation pressing down on her. "Maybe I should just go back," she said softly, "before someone gets hurt because of me." Quentin crossed the room in 2 strides, kneeling before her chair to look her in the eyes. "Is that what you want?" he asked, his gaze intent. "To marry a man old enough to be your grandfather? To let your uncle sell you like property?" "No," Hattie whispered, tears filling her eyes. "But I never wanted anyone else to be in danger either." "Hattie," Quentin said, using her given name for the first time, "some things are worth the risk. Your freedom, your life is one of them." The intensity in his eyes caught her off guard. This wasn't just about his sister anymore. Somehow, in the space of 2 days, her fate had become personally important to him. "I'm scared," she admitted, the words barely audible. Quentin reached out hesitantly, then seemed to think better of it, his hand falling back to his side. "Fear keeps us alive," he said. "But we can't let it rule us. 2 more days, and you'll be on your way to a new life. I promise you that." There was such conviction in his voice that Hattie found herself believing him. She nodded, wiping away a tear that had escaped despite her efforts. The rain continued throughout the day, trapping them in the small cabin together. They passed the time with conversation, Quentin telling her about his years working cattle drives before settling at the Double S, Hattie sharing stories of her childhood in Missouri before her family had moved west. They discovered a shared love of poetry, and Quentin read aloud from his dog-eared copy of Whitman, his deep voice giving new life to the familiar words. As evening approached, the rain finally stopped, leaving behind a freshly washed world and a spectacular sunset that painted the western sky in shades of orange and purple. They stood together in the doorway, watching the display. "It's beautiful," Hattie murmured. "Yes," Quentin agreed, though when she glanced up, she found him looking not at the sunset but at her. He quickly averted his gaze, a flush creeping up his neck. That night, as they prepared for sleep, an awkward tension hung in the air. Hattie was acutely aware of Quentin's presence, of the strange intimacy that had developed between them. In another day, she would be gone, and this brief intersection of their lives would end. The thought brought an unexpected sadness. "Mr. Stokes," she said as he settled onto his pallet. "I think, given the circumstances, you might call me Quentin," he replied. "Quentin," she amended, liking the feel of his name on her tongue. "I just wanted to say, I'll never forget your kindness. Not ever." In the firelight, she saw his expression soften. "Get some sleep, Hattie," he said gently. "Tomorrow we'll prepare for your journey." But sleep eluded her that night. Instead, she lay awake, listening to Quentin's steady breathing and wondering at the twist of fate that had brought him into her life at precisely the moment she needed him most. The third day broke clear and bright, the storm having washed away the dust and left behind a world that seemed newer, fresher. Quentin spent the morning showing Hattie what to expect on a cattle drive, the routine, the hierarchy, the work she would be expected to do as the cook's assistant. "It won't be easy," he warned. 14-hour days, sleeping on the ground, eating the same food day after day. And you'll be the only woman among 20 men. "I can handle it," Hattie assured him, though the prospect was daunting. "I've worked hard all my life." "I don't doubt it," Quentin replied with a hint of admiration. "Still, stay close to Hank or the cook, Beans. They'll look out for you. And avoid a hand named Tyler Dixon, he's got wandering hands and a loose tongue." They spent the afternoon packing what few supplies Quentin could spare: a spare shirt, a bedroll, a small knife for protection. Hattie insisted on leaving behind the dress she had escaped in, now clean and mended, preferring to travel in the men's clothing Quentin had provided. It would be more practical for the drive, and less likely to draw attention. As the sun began to set on what would be their last evening together, Quentin returned from checking his horse to find Hattie standing by the fireplace, staring into the flames. "You're worried," he observed, coming to stand beside her. "Wouldn't you be?" she asked, attempting a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Yes," he admitted. "But I also know Hank Jeffers is the best trail boss in the territory, and he gives his word sparingly but keeps it absolutely. You'll be safe with him." Hattie nodded, trying to take comfort in his confidence. "I received your brother's reply?" "Not yet," Quentin said. "But the telegraph office closed early today. I'll check again in the morning before we leave for the north pasture." They fell into silence, both aware that their time together was drawing to a close. Finally, Hattie spoke, giving voice to the question that had been nagging at her all day. "Will I see you again?" she asked softly, not looking at him. Quentin was quiet for so long that she thought he might not answer. When he did, his voice was low and careful. "Would you want to?" Now she did look at him, searching his face for the meaning behind his words. What she saw there made her breath catch: a vulnerability, a hope, quickly masked but unmistakable. "Yes," she said simply. Something shifted in Quentin's expression: relief, perhaps, or resolve. "Then you will," he promised. "Once you're settled at Quinn's, once this danger has passed. I could come to Pueblo." The idea sent a flutter of anticipation through Hattie's chest. "I'd like that." They stood there, the possibility of a future hanging between them, either quite ready to acknowledge what it might mean. Finally, Quentin cleared his throat and stepped back, breaking the moment. "We should get some sleep," he said. "Tomorrow will be an early start." As Hattie settled into bed for the last time, the cabin felt different: no longer a temporary shelter but a place of significance, a beginning rather than just a pause in her flight. Whatever happened tomorrow, this place, this man, had changed the course of her life. Good night, Quentin, she said into the darkness. Good night, Hattie, came his reply, warm and steady. Sleep well. Dawn had barely broken when they were awakened by the sound of horses approaching, multiple riders, moving fast. Quentin was on his feet in an instant, grabbing his rifle. Get to the root cellar, he ordered, his voice tense but controlled. Hattie didn't argue, quickly pulling on Quentin's oversized boots and scrambling for the trapdoor. As she descended into the dark, earthy space, she heard Quentin move to the window. 5 riders, he reported grimly. Coming straight for the cabin. My uncle's men? Hattie asked, fear clutching at her throat. Can't tell yet. Stay hidden, no matter what happens. Before she could protest, Quentin closed the trapdoor, leaving her in darkness. She heard him move around the cabin, then the sound of the front door opening. Morning, gentlemen, Quentin's voice came, muffled but audible through the floorboards. What brings you to my doorstep at this hour? Quentin Stokes? An unfamiliar voice responded. I'm Deputy Marshal Fletcher. These men are with me on official business. Hattie's heart pounded so loudly she was sure they must hear it. A marshal? Had her uncle's lie about the brooch reached the federal authorities? What kind of business? Quentin asked, his voice neutral. We're looking for a woman, Hattie Zachary. She's wanted for theft in Fort Laramie. We have reason to believe she might have passed this way. Haven't seen any woman, Quentin replied evenly. Been working cattle all week. Just got in late last night. There was a pause, then the sound of boots on the porch steps. Mind if we take a look around? You have a warrant, Marshal? No, the deputy admitted. But I have 5 men who've been riding all night, following a tip that a woman matching Miss Zachary's description was seen in this area 2 days ago. Hattie held her breath, pressing herself against the earthen wall of the root cellar. If they searched the cabin thoroughly, they would find the trapdoor. I respect the law, Marshal, Quentin said, his tone firm. But not enough to let you search my home without cause. I've told you I haven't seen the woman. That's the truth. One of these men works for Bartholomew Crane, the deputy said, his voice hardening. He says Miss Zachary is Crane's fiancée, and he's offering an additional $100 for information leading to her return. Sounds like a personal matter, not a legal one, Quentin observed. The theft makes it legal, the deputy insisted. Look, Stokes, we can do this the easy way or the hard way. I'd prefer not to drag you into town for obstructing justice. There was a long, tense silence. Then Quentin spoke, his voice different, resigned, almost amused. All right, Marshal. You've caught me. But it's not what you think. Hattie's blood ran cold. Was he betraying her? I do have a woman here, Quentin continued. Been here 2 nights now. But it's not your Miss Zachary. Then who is it? The deputy demanded. A lady from the Cherry Creek Saloon in Cheyenne, Quentin said, a note of embarrassment entering his voice. Name's Ruby. I paid for her company while I was in town last week. She wanted to get away from the saloon for a few days, and I was happy to oblige. There was a pause, then a burst of laughter from several of the men. Stokes, you sly dog, one of them said. Never figured you for the type. Where is this Ruby now? The deputy asked, skepticism evident in his tone. Still sleeping, Quentin replied. Had a late night, if you take my meaning. I'd prefer not to disturb her, but if you insist. More laughter, followed by the deputy's grudging voice. No need. But if you see anyone matching Miss Zachary's description, young blonde, about 5'4", you let us know immediately. She's in serious trouble. Of course, Marshal, Quentin agreed readily. I'm a law-abiding citizen. There was the sound of boots retreating, then horses moving away. Hattie remained frozen in place, hardly daring to breathe until she heard the trapdoor open and saw Quentin's face appear above her. They're gone, he said, reaching down to help her up. But they'll be back, I'd wager. Your uncle's casting a wide net. Once back in the cabin, Hattie saw that Quentin had hastily disarranged the bed to make it look recently occupied by 2 people. The clever deception both relieved and embarrassed her. "Quick thinking," she said, her cheeks warm. "Though I'm not sure what the ladies of Cherry Creek would think of being confused with me." A ghost of a smile touched Quentin's lips. "It was the first thing that came to mind. But it changes our plans. We can't wait for the cattle drive tomorrow." They could return any time, maybe with a proper warrant. "Then what do we do?" Hattie asked, the brief moment of levity fading. "We leave now," Quentin decided. "I'll take you to the meeting point for the drive myself. Hank won't be there yet, but there's an old line shack nearby where you can hide until he arrives." "You're coming with me?" Hattie couldn't hide her surprise or her relief. "Just to the meeting point," Quentin clarified. "I need to be seen around the ranch today, establishing that I was working, not harboring fugitives." They packed quickly, taking only what was essential. Quentin saddled his horse while Hattie gathered the last of their provisions. Within 20 minutes of the deputy's departure, they were ready to leave. As Quentin helped her onto the horse, his hands strong and steady at her waist, Hattie felt a surge of gratitude so powerful it nearly overwhelmed her. "I don't know how to thank you," she said, her voice thick with emotion. Quentin looked up at her, his eyes serious beneath the brim of his hat. "Stay safe," he said simply. "That's all the thanks I need." He swung up behind her, and they set off across the prairie, riding hard toward the north pasture, and what Hattie hoped would be the beginning of her freedom. The ride to the north pasture was tense, both of them constantly scanning the horizon for signs of pursuit. They kept to the low ground where possible, using the rolling terrain of the prairie to conceal their movement. Quentin was a skilled horseman, guiding his mount with minimal direction, keeping a steady pace that covered ground quickly without exhausting the animal. They spoke little, saving their breath and focus for the journey. Hattie was acutely aware of Quentin's body behind hers, his arm occasionally brushing her waist as he adjusted their course. Despite the danger, despite the uncertainty that lay ahead, she found herself memorizing these sensations: the rhythm of the horse beneath them, the solidity of Quentin's presence, the vast Wyoming sky arching above. By midday, they reached a shallow river that marked the boundary of the Double S's north pasture. Quentin guided the horse across at a narrow ford, then up a gentle slope to where a small, weathered cabin stood partially hidden by a stand of cottonwoods. "The line shack," he explained as they dismounted. "It's used during roundup, but empty the rest of the year. You'll be safe here until Hank arrives tomorrow morning." The shack was basic: a single room with a narrow cot, a table with 1 chair, and a small iron stove. Dust covered every surface, and a family of mice had clearly made themselves at home in one corner. Still, it was shelter, and far enough from the main roads to offer some security. Quentin quickly built a small fire in the stove to take the chill from the air. "I can't stay long," he said regretfully. "I need to get back before I'm missed." Hattie nodded, trying to hide her disappointment. The prospect of spending the night alone, knowing that men were searching for her, was daunting. But she understood the necessity of Quentin's return. "Will I see you before I leave?" she asked. Quentin hesitated. "I'll try to come back at first light, before Hank and his men arrive." "But if I don't make it?" He reached into his pocket and withdrew a folded piece of paper. "This is for Quinn. It explains everything he needs to know." Hattie took the letter, tucking it securely into the pocket of the borrowed shirt she wore. "Thank you for everything." Quentin looked at her for a long moment, as if committing her face to memory. Then, with a decisiveness that caught her by surprise, he stepped forward and took her hands in his. "Hattie," he said, his voice low and urgent. "I know we've known each other only a few days. I know this isn't the time or place. But I need you to know meeting you, helping you. It's changed something in me. Something I thought was long dead." Hattie's heart raced at his words, at the intensity in his eyes. "Quentin, you don't have to say anything," he interrupted gently. "I don't expect anything. I just needed you to know that whatever happens next, These days with you have meant something to me. Something important. Overwhelmed by emotion, Hattie did the only thing that felt right in that moment. She rose on tiptoe and pressed her lips to his in a brief, tender kiss. When she pulled back, the look of wonder on Quentin's face nearly undid her. They've meant something to me too, she whispered. For a heartbeat, they stood frozen, both surprised by the line they had just crossed. Then Quentin's arms were around her, pulling her close in an embrace that felt like coming home. Hattie melted into him, allowing herself this one moment of connection before they had to part. Too soon, Quentin pulled away, though his hands lingered on her shoulders. I have to go, he said, regret heavy in his voice. I know. He moved toward the door, then turned back. Bar the door behind me. Don't open it for anyone but me or Hank. He'll identify himself as Henry Jefferson, that's his full name, though no one uses it. Hattie nodded, already feeling the absence of his warmth. Be careful riding back. Always am, Quentin said with a small smile. Then, more seriously, stay safe, Hattie Zachary. I'll see you at dawn. After he left, Hattie barred the door as instructed and moved to the single grimy window, watching until Quentin's figure disappeared over the rise. Only then did she allow herself to feel the full weight of her situation alone in a deserted cabin, waiting for strangers to take her to a place she'd never been, pursued by men who wouldn't hesitate to drag her back to a life of servitude. And yet, for all the danger and uncertainty, there was also hope. Hope for a new beginning in Colorado. Hope for a future where she might choose her own path. And most surprising of all, hope for something she hadn't dared to consider until this moment, a chance at love with a man who saw her value, who respected her choices, who had risked himself to protect her. As the afternoon waned into evening, Hattie made herself as comfortable as possible in the sparse cabin. She ate sparingly from the provisions Quentin had provided, saving most for the journey ahead. She swept the worst of the dust from the cot and arranged her borrowed bedroll on top. As darkness fell, she banked the fire in the stove to provide warmth through the night without creating a visible glow that might attract attention. Sleep came fitfully, interrupted by every creak of the cabin's timbers and rustle of the surrounding trees. Hattie dreamed of running, of pursuit, of Quentin's arms reaching for her but always falling just short. She woke before dawn, disoriented and chilled. The fire had died during the night, leaving the cabin cold and dark. Hattie rekindled it with the last of the wood, then stood by the window, watching the eastern sky lighten with the promise of day. As the first golden rays of sunlight crested the horizon, Hattie strained her eyes for any sign of Quentin. The prairie stretched empty in all directions, no rider in sight. She told herself not to worry, it was early yet, and he had said he would try to come, not promised it with certainty. The sun climbed higher, warming the cabin and illuminating the dust motes that danced in the shafts of light. Still no sign of Quentin. Hattie's anxiety grew with each passing minute. Had something happened? Had he been discovered helping her? By mid-morning, she heard the distant sound of cattle and men the drive approaching. Hattie gathered her few belongings, preparing to meet the strangers who would be her companions for the journey to Colorado. But her heart was heavy with the realization that Quentin wasn't coming. A sharp knock at the door startled her from her thoughts. "Hello in there," called a gruff voice. "Henry Jefferson sending regards from Quentin Stokes." The recognition phrase. Hattie moved quickly to the door, unbarring it to reveal a weathered man in his 50s, his leathery face creased with lines that spoke of years under the sun. "Miss Zachary?" he asked, his eyes sharp beneath the brim of his hat. "Yes," Hattie confirmed. "You're Hank Jeffers?" The man nodded. "Quentin asked me to look after you. Said you needed safe passage to Pueblo. Is he, did he?" Hattie couldn't quite form the question she most wanted to ask. Hank's expression softened slightly. "He wanted to be here, miss. But there was trouble at the ranch last night. Seems your uncle's men came back with questions. Quentin needed to stay and make sure no suspicion fell on him." Disappointment and worry warred in Hattie's chest. "Is he in danger?" Quentin Stokes can handle himself," Hank assured her. "He asked me to give you this." He handed her a small folded paper. Hattie opened it with trembling fingers to find a brief note in Quentin's neat handwriting. "Hattie, I'm sorry I couldn't come as planned. Your uncle's men returned late last night with more questions. I need to stay and ensure they don't connect you to me or the double S. Hank will see you safely to Quinn. Trust him as you've trusted me. Until we meet again, Quentin." Beneath his signature was a hastily added postscript. What happened at the Lion Shack wasn't a goodbye. It was a beginning. Hattie pressed the note to her heart, a mixture of relief and longing washing over her. He was safe, for now at least. And he hadn't forgotten what had passed between them. "We need to move, miss," Hank said, breaking into her thoughts. "Drive's waiting, and we've got ground to cover." Outside, Hattie found a scene of organized chaos, several hundred cattle milling under the watchful eyes of a dozen cowboys, chuck wagon ready, horses saddled and waiting. Hank led her to the wagon, where a round, red-faced man was securing supplies. "Beans," Hank called. "This here's Hattie. She'll be helping you to Pueblo." The cook eyed her suspiciously. "Can you cook?" "Yes," Hattie replied, drawing on memories of helping her mother in their kitchen. "And I'm a fast learner." Beans grunted, apparently satisfied. "Get in, then. We're burning daylight." As Hattie climbed onto the wagon seat beside Beans, Hank tipped his hat to her. "Quentin said to tell you one more thing," he said quietly. "The beginning we talked about? He plans to see it through." With those words, Hank moved off to organize his men, leaving Hattie with a glow of hope that not even the daunting journey ahead could diminish. As the wagon lurched into motion and the cattle drive began its slow progress south, Hattie found herself looking not back toward the life she was fleeing, but forward to Colorado, to possibility, and to the promise of seeing Quentin Stokes again. The cattle drive moved with the patient inexorability of a river, slow but unstoppable, governed by rhythms as old as the land itself. Hattie quickly learned the routine: up before dawn to help Beans prepare breakfast for 20 hungry men, then break camp and move with the herd until midday. A brief stop for a cold lunch, then on again until dusk, when they would make camp, prepare dinner, and collapse into exhausted sleep before starting again the next day. The work was hard, harder than anything Hattie had done before. Her hands blistered from handling heavy pots over the campfire, her back ached from hours on the jolting wagon, and the constant dust raised by thousands of hooves coated everything, working its way into her clothes, her hair, her very pores. But there was satisfaction in the work too, in the grateful nods of the cowboys as she handed them plates of beans and biscuits, in Beans' grudging approval as she mastered the art of cooking over an open fire, in the vastness of the landscape that unfolded around them day by day. Hank kept his word, watching over her with a gruff protectiveness that reminded her of Quentin. He made sure she was never left alone with the rowdier hands, particularly Tyler Dixon, whose eyes followed her movements with an intensity that made her skin crawl. When Dixon made a crude comment about warming his bedroll, Hank had taken him aside. No one heard what was said, but Dixon kept his distance after that. At night, lying in her bedroll beneath the vast canopy of stars, Hattie would take out Quentin's note, now worn from frequent handling, and read it by the light of the campfire. What happened at the Lion Shack wasn't a goodbye. It was a beginning. The words sustained her through the long, grueling days, giving her something to hold on to beyond mere survival. By the 5th day, they had crossed into Colorado territory. The landscape changed subtly, the rolling prairie giving way to more dramatic terrain, with the distant silhouette of mountains visible on the western horizon. Hattie felt a growing sense of anticipation mixed with apprehension. What would Quinn Stokes be like? Would he welcome her as Quentin had promised, or would she be an unwanted burden? On the 10th day, as they made camp in a meadow beside a swift-flowing creek, Hank approached her as she was helping Beans prepare the evening meal. "We'll reach Pueblo in 2 days," he said, squatting beside the fire. "Quinn's ranch is about 10 miles east of town. I've arranged for one of the men to take you there while we deliver the herd to the stockyards." "Thank you," Hattie said, genuine gratitude in her voice. "I can't repay you for your kindness, but I want you to know how much it means to me." Hank looked embarrassed by her sincerity. "Just keeping a promise to a friend," he said gruffly. "Besides, you've earned your keep. Beans here might even miss you when you're gone." The cook harumphed, but there was a hint of affection in the sound. Over the past 10 days he had gone from skeptical to grudgingly accepting to almost paternal in his attitude toward Hattie. "Girl's got a knack for biscuits," he admitted. "Better than the last 3 boys I trained." That night, as the camp settled into sleep, Hattie found herself unable to join them. Tomorrow would be their last full day on the trail. The day after, she would meet Quentin Stokes and begin yet another new chapter in her rapidly changing life. The uncertainty of it all kept her awake, staring at the stars and wondering what Quentin was doing at that very moment. Was he safe? Had her uncle's men discovered his role in her escape? Would she ever see him again? A rustle of movement nearby drew her attention. Hattie tensed, her hand moving to the small knife Quentin had given her, which she kept close at all times. A figure approached her bedroll, too small to be Hank, too wiry to be Beans. "Evenin', Miss Zachary," came Tyler Dixon's voice, low and insinuating. Hattie sat up, alert and wary. "Mr. Dixon? You should be asleep. We start early tomorrow." Dixon squatted beside her bedroll, too close for comfort. In the dim starlight she could see the gleam of his teeth as he smiled. "Thought you might like some company. Gets lonely out here on the trail." "I'm fine, thank you," Hattie said firmly, her grip tightening on the knife beneath her blanket. "Please go back to your bedroll." Dixon chuckled, a sound that raised the hair on the back of Hattie's neck. "No need to play shy, darlin'. Hank ain't around to interfere. Just you and me and the stars." He reached out, his hand moving to touch her face. Hattie reacted instinctively, bringing up the knife and pressing its point against Dixon's wrist. "Don't," she warned, her voice steady despite the fear coursing through her. Dixon froze, surprise and anger flashing across his face. "Now that's not friendly," he growled, his other hand moving to grab her arm. Before he could touch her, a new voice cut through the darkness. "Problem here, Dixon?" One of the other cowboys, a quiet man named Jeb who rode flank position, stood a few yards away, his hand resting casually on the gun at his hip. Dixon hesitated, then slowly withdrew his hand. "No problem," he muttered. "Just passing the time." "Looks like the lady doesn't want your company," Jeb observed. "Why don't you go pass time elsewhere?" For a moment, Dixon looked like he might argue, but something in Jeb's stance, or perhaps the knowledge that others in camp were now awake and watching, made him think better of it. He stood, spitting into the dirt near Hattie's bedroll. "Your loss," he said, then stalked back to his own sleeping area. Jeb remained where he was until Dixon was well away. "You all right, miss?" he asked quietly. "Yes," Hattie said, her voice only slightly unsteady. "Thank you." Jeb nodded. "Hank asked us to keep an eye out. Dixon's been trouble before." He touched the brim of his hat. "I'll be nearby if you need anything." After he moved away, settling into a spot between Hattie's bedroll and Dixon's, she slowly relaxed her grip on the knife. The incident had shaken her more than she wanted to admit. It was a harsh reminder of her vulnerability as a woman alone, even among supposedly decent men. When dawn broke, Hattie was already awake, having slept little after Dixon's unwelcome visit. She went about her morning duties mechanically, avoiding Dixon's gaze when their paths crossed. Hank seemed to sense something was wrong and kept her close throughout the day, assigning her tasks that kept her near him or Beans. That evening, as they made their final camp before reaching Pueblo, Hank sought her out as she was washing dishes in a small stream that ran near the campsite. "Dixon giving you trouble?" he asked without preamble. Hattie considered denying it, then decided on honesty. "He came to my bedroll last night." Jeb intervened. Hank's weathered face hardened. "I should have sent him packing in Wyoming," he said grimly. "Too late now, but he won't bother you again. I'll make sure of it." True to his word, Hank arranged for Jeb and another hand named Carlos to sleep on either side of Hattie that night. Dixon kept his distance, though she could feel his resentful gaze whenever she moved around the camp. The next morning, as they prepared for the final push to Pueblo, Hank pulled her aside. "Change of plans?" he said. "I'm sending you ahead with Jeb today. No sense waiting for tomorrow. Quinn's expecting you." Hattie understood what he wasn't saying. He wanted her away from Dixon and the drive as soon as possible. "Thank you," she said, grateful for his continued protection. Within the hour, she was mounted behind Jeb on his sturdy gray gelding, her few possessions bundled in front of them. As they rode away from the slow-moving herd, Hattie felt a strange mixture of relief and apprehension. The cattle drive had been hard, but it had also been a defined purpose, a clear role. Now she was heading toward a new unknown. Jeb was a man of few words, but as they rode, he occasionally pointed out landmarks or shared bits of information about the area. By midday, they crested a low rise, and he reined in his horse. "There it is," he said, pointing to a cluster of buildings nestled in a small valley about 2 miles distant. "The Circle S, Quentin Stokes's place." Hattie studied the ranch with interest. It was smaller than she had imagined, a modest house, a barn, a corral, and what looked like a bunkhouse, though from this distance it was hard to be sure. Fields of what might be wheat or corn stretched to the east, while cattle grazed on the rolling land to the north. "It's not much compared to some spreads," Jeb commented, "but Quinn's built it up steady over the years. Good water, good grass. He's doing all right." They rode down into the valley, following a well-worn track that led to the ranch house. As they approached, Hattie saw a man emerge from the barn, tall like Quentin, but broader in the shoulders, with a beard that Quentin didn't have. He shaded his eyes against the afternoon sun, watching their approach. When they reached the yard, the man stepped forward. "Jeb," he greeted with a nod. "Didn't expect to see you ahead of the herd." "Special delivery, Quinn," Jeb replied, dismounting and helping Hattie down. "This here's Miss Hattie Zachary. Your brother sent her." Quentin Stokes studied Hattie with eyes that were the same clear blue as Quentin's, though lacking the warmth she had come to associate with the younger Stokes brother. "So you're the one," he said finally. "Got Quentin's telegram a week ago. Said you needed a safe place." "Yes, sir," Hattie replied, suddenly nervous under his scrutiny. "I'm grateful for your hospitality." Quinn's expression remained unreadable. "Quentin didn't say much about why you needed safety. Just that it was important to him that you have it." Before Hattie could respond, the door of the house opened, and a small figure darted out, a girl of about 7, with dark braids and a face that lit up at the sight of visitors. "Papa! We have company!" she cried, running to Quinn's side. Quinn's stern expression softened as he placed a hand on his daughter's shoulder. "Lily, this is Miss Zachary. She's going to be staying with us for a while." Lily regarded Hattie with frank curiosity. "Are you the lady Uncle Quentin wrote about? The one who's good with numbers and sewing?" Hattie glanced at Quinn, surprised. "I don't know what your uncle wrote, but I am good with both those things." Lily's face broke into a wide smile. "Good. Papa's terrible at sewing, and I tore my school dress last week. He said I'd have to wait until Mrs. Watkins could mend it, but now you can do it." Despite her fatigue and anxiety, Hattie found herself smiling at the child's enthusiasm. "I'd be happy to help with your dress." Quinn cleared his throat. "Lily, why don't you show Miss Zachary to the guest room while I speak with Jeb?" As Lily led her into the house, chattering excitedly about school and her dress, and how nice it was to have another lady around, Hattie felt a small knot of tension begin to unwind. The child's welcome was heartening, even if Quinn himself seemed reserved. The guest room was small but neat, with a narrow bed, a chest of drawers, and a window that looked out toward the mountains in the distance. It was the first real bedroom Hattie had seen since leaving her uncle's ranch, and the prospect of sleeping in an actual bed after nights on the hard ground was immensely appealing. "Supper's at 6, Lily informed her. "Papa makes stew on Tuesdays. It's not bad, But sometimes the carrots are too hard. Left alone, Hattie unpacked her meager possessions and used the basin of water Lily had brought to wash away the worst of the trail dust. She changed into the clean shirt Quentin had given her, the last one that didn't smell of campfire smoke and cattle, and tried to make herself presentable. First impressions mattered, and she wanted Quinn to see her as an asset, not a burden. When she joined them for supper, she found Quinn and Lily already seated at the table in the small kitchen. The stew was indeed on the table, along with bread that looked freshly baked. "Mrs. Watkins from town brings bread twice a week," Lily explained as Hattie took a seat. "She helps with the washing too. Papa says I'm too young to do it properly." Quinn served the stew without comment, his movements efficient but not unfriendly. They ate in silence for a few minutes before he finally spoke. "Quentin's letter said you're running from your uncle and an unwanted marriage," he said, his tone matter-of-fact. "Said there might be men looking for you." Hattie nodded, aware of Lily's curious gaze. "Yes. My uncle arranged for me to marry a business associate to settle a debt. I refused. They may still be searching for me." Quinn considered this. "You understand that by taking you in, I could be putting my daughter and my ranch at risk." "I do," Hattie acknowledged, meeting his gaze steadily. "And I would understand if you asked me to leave." "But your brother thought you might be willing to help, that you might need help yourself." Quinn's eyes narrowed slightly, but he didn't deny it. "Ranch this size needs more hands than I have," he admitted. "Lily needs looking after when I'm working the land or with the cattle. And the books need attention. I'm months behind in my accounts. I can help with all of that," Hattie said earnestly. "I kept my parents' books for years before they died. I can cook, clean, so whatever you need. I won't be a burden, Mr. Stokes. I promise you that." Quinn studied her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then, to Hattie's surprise, the corner of his mouth quirked up in what might have been the beginning of a smile. "Quentin said you were determined? Seems he was right about that, at least." He turned to Lily. "What do you think, Lil? Should we let Miss Zachary stay a while?" Lily's face lit up. "Yes. She can help me with my reading and fix my dress and teach me to make pies like Mrs. Watkins." Quinn's almost smile widened slightly. "Sounds like you've been elected, Miss Zachary." His expression grew serious again. "But we need to be clear. If there's any sign of trouble, any hint that those men are looking for you here, you'll need to move on. Lily comes first." "Of course," Hattie agreed immediately. "I wouldn't want to bring danger to your home." Quinn nodded, apparently satisfied. "Then welcome to the Circle S. We'll work out details tomorrow. For now, you look dead on your feet. Get some rest." That night, in the unfamiliar comfort of a real bed, Hattie found sleep elusive despite her exhaustion. The journey that had begun with a desperate flight across the prairie had brought her here, to this small ranch in Colorado, to this new beginning. She was safe, for now at least. She had shelter, purpose, even the beginnings of acceptance. But as she finally drifted toward sleep, it was Quentin's face that filled her thoughts, Quentin's words that echoed in her mind. What happened at the Lion Shack wasn't a goodbye. It was a beginning. She hoped with all her heart that he was right, that this wasn't the end of their story but merely a pause, a separation before reunion. With that hope cradled close to her heart, Hattie Zachary slept her first peaceful sleep in weeks. The days at the Circle S fell into a rhythm that was both demanding and satisfying. Hattie rose before dawn to help Quinn prepare breakfast before he headed out to work the ranch. Then she would get Lily ready for school, packing her lunch and walking her to the small schoolhouse 2 miles away. The rest of the day was filled with household tasks: cooking, cleaning, mending, and gradually taking over the ranch's neglected bookkeeping. Quinn was right. The accounts were in disarray. Hattie spent hours at the kitchen table, sorting through receipts and ledgers, bringing order to the financial chaos. By the end of her first week, she had a clear picture of the ranch's situation: not desperate, but precarious. Quinn was land-rich but cash-poor, with a mortgage payment due to the bank in Pueblo at the end of the month. You need to sell some of those yearlings in the north pasture, she told him one evening as they sat at the table after Lily had gone to bed. The price in Pueblo is good right now, according to the newspaper. It would cover the mortgage and leave something for supplies. Quinn looked at her with surprise. You figured all that out from these? He gestured to the ledgers spread before them. Numbers tell a story if you know how to read them, Hattie replied. And yours tell me you're working too hard for too little return. The ranch could be more profitable with some adjustments. Such as? You're paying too much for feed. If you planted alfalfa in the lower field instead of corn, you could cut your winter feed costs by a third. And your arrangement with the mercantile in town for supplies is highway robbery. Mrs. Watkins mentioned there's a new store opening in Pueblo that offers better prices if you buy in bulk. Quinn leaned back in his chair, regarding her with what looked like newfound respect. Quentin said you were smart? Seems he was right about that too. The mention of Quentin sent a pang through Hattie's heart. Have you heard from him? She asked, trying to keep her voice casual. Quinn shook his head. Not since the telegram saying you were coming. But that's not unusual. Quentin was never much for writing letters. He studied her face. You miss him. It wasn't a question, but Hattie answered anyway. Yes. Quinn nodded, as if her response confirmed something he had suspected. My brother has always been the careful one, thinking before acting, weighing consequences. For him to help you the way he did, to risk his position at the Double S, you must have made quite an impression. Hattie felt her cheeks warm. He saved my life. I'll always be grateful to him for that. Just grateful? Quinn asked, a knowing look in his eyes. Hattie met his gaze steadily. No. Not just grateful. Quinn nodded again, then rose from the table. I'll look into those yearlings tomorrow, he said, changing the subject. And the alfalfa idea has merit. We'll discuss it further. As the weeks passed, Hattie found herself increasingly integrated into life at the Circle S. Lily adored her, following her around the house and yard, eager to learn everything from sewing to bread making. Quinn, initially reserved, gradually relaxed in her presence, even developing a dry sense of humor that sometimes caught her by surprise. The fear that had been her constant companion since fleeing her uncle's ranch began to recede. She still checked the road whenever riders approached, still tensed at the sight of strangers in town on the rare occasions she accompanied Quinn and Lily to Pueblo. But no one seemed to be looking for her. Perhaps her uncle had given up the search, or perhaps he had never extended it this far west. One evening in late July, about 6 weeks after her arrival at the Circle S, Hattie sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the distant mountains in shades of gold and purple. Lily was inside, practicing her reading, while Quinn checked on a mare that was close to foaling. The sound of an approaching rider drew Hattie's attention. She shaded her eyes against the setting sun, trying to make out who was coming up the road. It wasn't unusual for neighbors to visit, but something about the rider's silhouette sent her heart racing. As the figure drew closer, Hattie rose to her feet, hardly daring to believe what her eyes were telling her. The height, the way he sat his horse, the broad-brimmed hat, all achingly familiar. Quentin! She whispered, and then louder. Quentin! She was running before she consciously decided to move, her skirts gathered in her hands, her feet flying over the dusty yard. The rider spurred his horse to a trot, closing the distance between them. Quentin Stokes swung down from his saddle just as Hattie reached him, his boots hitting the ground with a solid thud. For a moment, they stood facing each other, both breathing hard, either speaking. You're here, Hattie finally said, her voice barely above a whisper. Quentin's face, tanned and perhaps a bit thinner than she remembered, broke into a smile that transformed his serious features. I told you it was a beginning, not a goodbye. And then he was stepping forward, and she was in his arms, and the world seemed to right itself after weeks of being slightly off-kilter. Hattie breathed in the scent of him, leather and horses, and the unique essence that was just Quentin, and felt tears prick at her eyes. I miss you, she said against his chest, her words muffled by his shirt. His arms tightened around her. I miss you too, Every day. A shout from the direction of the house broke the moment. Uncle Quentin! Lily was racing toward them, her face alight with excitement. Quentin reluctantly released Hattie to catch his niece as she launched herself at him. He swung her in a circle, her delighted laughter ringing in the evening air. Look how you've grown! He exclaimed, setting her on her feet. You're nearly as tall as your father. I am not, Lily giggled. But I'm taller than when you saw me at Christmas. And I can read chapter books now. Hattie's been helping me. Has she? Quentin's gaze returned to Hattie, warm with appreciation. Somehow that doesn't surprise me at all. Quinn appeared from the direction of the barn, wiping his hands on a rag. He paused, taking in the scene before him, then approached with measured steps. Didn't expect to see you before fall roundup, he said to his brother, though there was no reproach in his tone. Finished my business at the Double S earlier than expected, Quentin replied, clasping his brother's hand. Thought I'd come see how things are at the Circle S. The brothers exchanged a look that seemed to contain an entire conversation. Then Quinn nodded slightly. Lily, come help me finish with that mare. Your uncle's had a long ride. He could probably use some supper. As Quinn led his protesting daughter back toward the barn, Quentin turned to Hattie. In the fading light, his eyes were serious, searching her face as if looking for changes. You look well, he said softly. Better than well. I am, Hattie assured him. Your brother and niece have been kind. It's a good place, the Circle S. Quentin glanced toward the modest ranch house, the barn, the fields beyond. It's not much compared to the Double S, he said, echoing Jeb's words from weeks ago. It's more than enough, Hattie replied. It's become home, in a way I didn't expect. Something flickered in Quentin's expression, pleasure mixed with what might have been uncertainty. I'm glad, he said. That's what I hoped for when I sent you here. They walked together toward the house, leading Quentin's horse. There was so much Hattie wanted to ask, so much she wanted to tell him, but the most pressing question couldn't wait. Are you in danger? She asked. Because of me? Did they discover you helped me? Quentin shook his head. Your uncle's men questioned me, as I wrote in my note. But they found nothing to connect us. And after a few weeks, the search seemed to die down. Last I heard, your uncle had returned to Fort Laramie, and Crane with him. Relief washed over Hattie. So it's over? They've given up? It seems so, Quentin said cautiously. Though I'd still advise caution if you ever travel near Wyoming territory again. I have no plans to return, Hattie assured him. They reached the house, and Quentin tethered his horse to the hitching post. Before they could enter, he placed a hand on Hattie's arm, stopping her. There's something you should know, he said, his expression serious again. I'm not just visiting. I've left the Double S. Hattie's eyes widened in surprise. But you were the foreman. You had a good position. I did, Quentin acknowledged. But after you left, nothing felt right anymore. The work was the same, the people were the same, but I was different. He took a deep breath. I've been offered a position as range manager for the railroad's land holdings in Colorado. It would mean being based in Pueblo, overseeing grazing rights and cattle operations on railroad property. That sounds like an important job, Hattie said, trying to understand what this meant for them. It is. Better pay than the Double S, more responsibility. And, he hesitated, then continued with determination, and it would mean being near the Circle S, near you if that's something you might want. Hattie's heart seemed to stop, then resume beating at twice its normal pace. Is that why you took the job? To be near me? Quentin met her gaze steadily. Yes, he said simply. I know it's fast. I know we've spent more time apart than together. But I haven't been able to stop thinking about you, Hattie. About the way you looked at me in that line shack, about the courage you've shown, about the feeling I had when I held you in my arms. He took her hands in his touch gentle but sure. I'm not asking for promises. I'm just asking for a chance to see if what began between us on the prairie that night could grow into something lasting. Hattie looked up at this man who had risked everything to help her when she was a stranger, who had protected her, respected her, and now crossed hundreds of miles to be near her. The answer was as clear as the first stars beginning to appear in the darkening sky. "I'd like that chance very much," she said softly. The smile that lit Quentin's face was like sunrise after the longest night. He lifted her hands to his lips, pressing a kiss to her knuckles that sent warmth spreading through her entire body. "Then we'll take it," he promised. "One day at a time." From the barn, Lily's voice called out, breaking the moment. "Uncle Quentin! Come see the new foal! He's just been born!" Quentin laughed, keeping one of Hattie's hands in his as they turned toward the barn. "Duty calls," he said. "But we have time now. All the time we need." As they walked hand in hand across the yard, Hattie felt a sense of rightness, of pieces falling into place. The desperate flight across the prairie that had brought Quentin into her life had been the beginning of a journey not just away from danger, but toward something precious and rare. Toward love, toward home, toward a future that once seemed impossible but now stretched before her, full of promise. 3 months later, on a crisp October day with leaves turning gold on the cottonwoods along the creek, Hattie Zachary became Hattie Stokes in a simple ceremony at the Circle S. Quinn stood as his brother's best man, and Lily, bursting with importance, scattered wildflower petals before the bride. The guests were few. Hank Jeffers and his wife, come up from Texas for the occasion. Beans, surprisingly dapper in a suit that strained at his ample middle, Jeb and Carlos from the cattle drive, and a handful of neighbors from nearby ranches. Quentin had prospered in his new position with the railroad, dividing his time between Pueblo and the Circle S, where Quinn had built a small cabin for the newlyweds on the eastern edge of the property. It was a perfect arrangement, close enough for family meals and shared work, but with privacy for the young couple to build their life together. As winter settled over Colorado, bringing snow to the mountains and quiet evenings by the fire, Hattie often thought about the night she had fled across the Wyoming prairie, terrified and alone. Had she known then what awaited her, not just safety, but love, family, purpose, perhaps her fear would have been less. But then, she reflected, it was fear that had driven her to run, and running that had brought her to Quentin. "What are you thinking about?" Quentin asked one evening as they sat before the fire in their cabin, his arm around her shoulders, her head resting against his chest. "About how sometimes the worst moments of our lives lead us to the best," she replied, looking up at the man who had become her husband, her partner, her home. Quentin's eyes, warm in the firelight, held a lifetime of understanding. "I thank God every day that I was riding fence that night," he said softly, pressing a kiss to her forehead. "That I found you, that I said I'll protect you now." Hattie finished for him, the words that had changed her life forever. "And you have, in more ways than I can count." Outside, snow began to fall, each flake a tiny miracle of perfection, a reminder that even in the coldest seasons, beauty found its way into the world. Inside, wrapped in the warmth of love and the promise of tomorrow, Hattie and Quentin Stokes wrote the continuing chapters of a story that had begun with a desperate escape across a moonlit prairie and would continue, day by day, season by season, for all the years to come.